me do that one more time. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm James Fogarty. I'm the Executive Director of A+ Schools. It's my distinct honor to serve in that role. I'm so happy to see so many of you tonight. I just wanted to recognize we've got Sylvia Wilson from the Pittsburgh Public Schools Board. Thank you for being here. Veronica Edwards, who's a presumptive nominee to the school board, is here as well. So thank you both for being here. I know Terry Kennedy and I spoke earlier today. She's another board member. She said she might not be able to make it, but she wanted just to let me know that she was hoping to be here, but she might not be able to be here. I want to bring up our board chair, Tracy Reed-Armont. She is my co-partner in this work, an educational leader in her own right, a parent of 2 children in Pittsburgh Public Schools, and we're just so happy to be here. So thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We are, on behalf of the board of A+ Schools, I just want to welcome you. We are so excited about this work in restorative practices, and we greatly appreciate your attendance. So restorative practices is really important to us primarily because we understand that this is not just, restorative practices isn't just a program. It's not just a set of practices. It's actually a belief system. And at the core of that belief system is an understanding that all children will do better academically, and basically they just deserve to be in schools where they're treated with respect. So restorative practices helps to give adults in school buildings tools to thoughtfully consider students' perspectives and avoid defaulting to punitive disciplinary measures. We know that this is hard work. That's why we're here. And that's why we're excited that you're all here with us. So again, thank you for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce State Representative Jake Wheatley, who is a member of the Black elected officials, who's a co-sponsor of this event tonight, as well as a former A+ Schools board member. Jake.
Good evening, everyone. So before I begin, I think it's very important that we recognize that we don't live in a world just inside of Pittsburgh, but there are things across the country and across the world that are happening and that people deserve and is much needed, our love and our prayers. So I just wanted to ask all of us to kind of like take a second, because I know we're on quick time, but to reflect about the incidents that's happening in Houston, things that happened in Virginia several weeks ago, and just the international scene that is going on right now, and the fact that we need more love than hate. And so definitely want to take a moment of silence for that. Now, with that being said, that was a quick moment, by the way. I said we're going to be quick. With that being said, I was asked to talk. First of all, I want to thank you for having the Pittsburgh Black Elected Officials Coalition, which comprised of myself, Representative Ed Gainey, County Councilman DeWitt Walton, City Councilman Ricky Burgess, and City Councilman Daniel Lavelle. And we are honored to be here and a partner in this event today. One of our areas that we are very much focused on to try to bring some positive policy solutions towards is the educational inequity and challenges in our district. And one of the things that we, or at least myself and Representative Jordan Harris in Harrisburg, Jordan Harris is a representative out of Philadelphia, who's also the chairman of the Black Caucus. We proposed a bill earlier that would prevent suspensions from K to 5 in school districts across the Commonwealth, except for drug-related incidents or extreme violence. And one of the reasons why we did that is because we took a look at the statistics and we took a look at the realities that more of our children of color and more of our children who are impacted by some type of disability were negatively being impacted by over-exposures and over-suspensions. And the data also says that just because you are kicking these kids out of the buildings and out of classrooms doesn't necessarily improve your school climate, doesn't necessarily improve the academic performance. And the more and more data is coming out now that says that this thing that you'll hear more about later, when we, instead of looking to punish kids, we look to try to really use opportunities to help enhance learning, and we look at ways to try to build their self-esteem and get to the core reasons for why they do what they do, that becomes a better lifelong lesson, that becomes a better academic enhancing lesson, that becomes a better character development lesson, and that's something that I think we should all be about. Because again, if we just keep in mind, it's better for us to love than hate, and it's better for us to support than to try to dismiss. I think we'll all agree that expelling kids and suspending kids, especially when most of it are for minor infractions, is something that is avoidable and devastating too in the long run as it relates to if we're ever going to do something substantially about the academic differences or the opportunity gaps between children of color, children with disabilities, and others. I think it's very important that we look at these new ways and look at the data and figure out ways to connect it. So anyway, long story short, thank you for having us. I look forward to working with all of you and A+ and Miss Brandy Taylor, who I'm going to bring up next. She said just to say it's Brandy Taylor, who I'm introducing, right? So it's Brandy Taylor.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Brandy Taylor. I'm a training manager with A+ Schools, and I'm going to try to do this thing as informal as possible. I'm more comfortable doing this in a conversational setting. So I'm going to provide an overview of restorative practices for you tonight and to let you know why we feel like restorative practices is the most valuable alternative to exclusionary discipline. So, what exactly is restorative practices? And how does it differ from restorative justice? Well, restorative practices emphasizes the importance of continuing to engage in positive relationships that are necessary to build community. And it also offers the opportunity to rebuild and restore relationships whenever harm has occurred. So by definition, we see that restorative practices is two-pronged. It provides both a proactive component and a reactive component. And the proactive piece of it is the processes that focus on building community, establishing relationships in order to decrease conflict and be able to manage tension. And in a school setting, you would use the processes of affective statements, community building circles, and curriculum circles. And also the reactive part, the reactive piece, that the processes provide the opportunity, again, to rebuild and to rebuild relationships and repair harm. And in a school setting, the tools that would be used are problem-solving circles, accountability circles, and reentry circles. So the reactive processes that I just referred to are what most people are more aware of, or they use the term restorative justice. And what restorative justice does is it provides that space, the space for dialogue to have a voice and to have choice, and at the same time, administer a logical and effective consequence. So in a school setting, again, what restorative justice looks like is peer mediation teams, school justice collaborations, and victim and offender dialogue. So here you have a restorative practice continuum. And the continuum provides a visual to the processes that were aforementioned. It ranges from informal to formal, and as you move from the left to your right along the continuum, the processes become more intensive. They require more people, more time, and more structure. The first two processes along the continuum are your proactive piece that I spoke about. That's your affective statements, your affective questions, known as restorative conversations. This is the part where you're building community. This is the proactive piece that I spoke about, that I said you're continuing to engage in conversation. You're continuing to make sure you emphasize that positive relationships are necessary. And the purpose of that is to decrease conflict and be able to manage tension. And the following three processes that are on the continuum are your reactive processes, known to most as restorative justice. Your small impromptu conferences are your one-to-one dialogue that you would have with a student. This is where it follows an incident, again, being reactive. The fourth process along the continuum is a group or a circle. That's a community dialogue where you are, again, addressing an occurrence of conflict, following conflict. The fifth and final process on the continuum is a formal conference, and most know it as a reentry circle. This is the process that's most intensive, that it requires a lot of structure, more people, more time. And this is actually once a student has been suspended. It's building relationship again, offering that opportunity, and repairing the harm. So I hear a lot where people use the terms restorative practice and restorative justice interchangeably. But as you can see on the continuum that was just there, it's okay, that restorative justice is actually a component of restorative practices. What restorative justice does is it specifically focuses on being able to rebuild and repair, and the opportunity to actually help hold accountability and effectively use a consequence to make sure that it follows logically the offense. So restorative practices acknowledges that that space is needed, but it also emphasizes the importance of building community. So that's how they differ. Restorative justice is the reactive part, and restorative practices incorporates the two. The piece of building community, the piece of emphasizing positive relationships, and then offering the opportunity to repair and rebuild. So what role does education play in this? What role does education play in restorative practices? So education should be more than just receiving systematic instruction. It should be more than just providing content. Learning should focus on values and behaviors, the things that assist children in learning and thriving in a diverse community. So if we, people in a position of authority, such as parents, teachers, employers, if we ensure that values and behaviors are held at the same level of importance as academics, then we are beginning to foster those healthy relationships. We are beginning to cultivate healthy and quality work environments, and we're ultimately improving school climate. And ensuring those and handling those actions and employing those traits are the very things that differentiate and set apart a boss from a leader, an influential teacher from one who just teaches, or a parent that's nurturing and encouraging from one who just parents. So I hear a lot that sounds great in theory, all of these terms and the processes, it sounds great on paper, it sounds great, but you want to know how to apply it practically. And it's a challenge. I just want to say that it's by choice that you apply it practically. I think everyone in a position has a choice to do so, that you can choose to view obstacles as opportunities. If you're an employer and you are faced with a challenge of an insubordinate employee, then you can choose to view that challenge as an opportunity to coach. If you're a parent who is challenged with a disobedient child or a child that continues to break curfew, you can view that obstacle as a bonding opportunity to let your child know that you're vulnerable and that you were once a teenager as well and that you broke curfew. And if you're a teacher and you're faced with challenges, you can view those, and you will, many behavior challenges, you can view those obstacles as opportunities to rewire and refocus that child. So the problem is, and the problem is not that child on the screen, the problem is that exclusionary discipline disproportionately affects Black and brown students as well as students with disability. because black and brown students are 9 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Exclusionary discipline, it begins the school to prison pipeline. And youth with 3 or more suspensions are 5 times more likely to drop out of school. So exclusionary discipline decreases educational attainment, and it increases the likelihood of being involved in the juvenile justice system. So in conclusion, this is why we feel that restorative practices is the most viable alternative to exclusionary discipline. Because by incorporating the proactive piece of community building circles or emphasizing relationships, you're beginning to build social capital, influence human behavior. It assists with curriculum content, and it also helps classroom management. But ultimately, the proactive piece is to decrease the conflict, the number of offenses that you'll have. And then the latter part of being reactive, providing that opportunity to hold space, to have dialogue. You are then rebuilding, repairing, and reintegrating that student back into community shameless. So that is the goal of restorative practices, to be proactive and reactive, but that has to be by choice. So I'll hand the mic over to our moderators now, Zion, and they will introduce the moderators. I'm sorry, not the moderators, the panelists.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Zion Scott, and I'm a 9th grader at Taylor Olderdice High School.
And my name is Leon Blair, and I am an 11th grader at Pittsburgh High School.
Before we get started, we want to briefly go over the guidelines for our panel tonight. We will have a few questions for the entire panel and then a couple targeted questions for the panelists. There is a 2-minute time limit per question for each panelist. And in the front row, we have a timekeeper who will be notifying the panelists of how much time they have left and holding up a pink card when time is up. We ask that you please respect the time limits.
If a member of the audience has a question, please write it on the index card that you will be provided with. The ushers will be around soon to collect those cards. Now, let's introduce the panelists. First, we have Ms. Cheryl Kleiman from the Education Law Center. Next, we have Mr. Michael Calvert, a principal at Pittsburgh Phillips K-5. Then we have Ms. O, who is the Dean of Students at Eastern Senior High School in Washington, D.C. Then we have Ms. Chalegra Moy, a parent and active volunteer with Manchester Academic Charter School, Pittsburgh Public Schools, and A+ Schools. And then we have Mr. Zachary Larson, who is the coordinator of School, Climate, and Culture at Luke C. Moore Opportunity Academy in Washington, D.C., and a citywide restorative justice facilitator for the D.C. Public Schools.
Thank you to all the panelists for being here tonight. Let's start with our first question that each panelist will now have 2 minutes each to answer. Why do you value the use of restorative practices?
Hi, good evening, everyone. So, again, I'm Cheryl Kleiman. I'm an attorney with the Education Law Center here in Pittsburgh, and I value restorative practices because it recognizes that we can all learn and grow, which is what students are in school to do. And I think the use of practices, it's important to recognize that because the opportunities that are available to students don't always seem to reflect that reality, that all students have the capacity to learn and that we should have that expectation for all students. I value its emphasis on relationships, as Brandy talked about, which allows us to get proximate with people with different experiences and perspective and learn how to build relationship across those differences. We hear from students that we work with how important those positive and trusted relationships are with adults and peers in their school building. And I value that it allows students to stay in school, the place where they're entitled to be and are legally required to be.
Thank you. We're going to reset the time for Mr. Culver.
Once again, good evening. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you. Very simply put, restorative practices to me as an elementary school principal is about a shift, a paradigm shift. That's the value, is a shift in thinking of, in a classroom setting, of the authoritative teacher and principal to a shift in that's focused on compliance, right? Because compliance is you do what we want you to do. Well, we want kids to grow as individuals, as human beings, as learners, as members of their community. So restorative practices really represents a shift in thinking to approach not only student behavior, but relationships, like you said, across between students and themselves, between students and adults, but also between adults in the school setting and also adults, or staff and parents, community members. It's a shift. We're taking it a step further and saying we're all on the same page and we're in this together, and that we're going to respect each other. I do love the fact that, and I agree wholeheartedly that kids belong in the classroom. And, you know, I always think back, if we can't teach math, the kid's not getting it, we find another way, we find another way, we find another way. They can't behave, we throw them out. It doesn't make any sense. So restorative practices is part of how we reach those students, keep them in the classroom, and shift our thinking. So,
thank you, Mr. Howard. Ms. O?
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. Our children come to our buildings and into our lives with extremely heavy, invisible backpacks. And I feel like restorative practices allows those children, and the adults too, to put your invisible backpack down for a moment to create the space for relationships to be fostered and to grow. I come into this work really with my whole heart. My children always say to me that sometimes they feel like I love my students more than I love them. And that's certainly not true. However, they really are a part of who I am and what I do. And the restorative practices gives you the opportunity to discipline as opposed to simply punish. Punishment is really easy. Discipline takes way more time. Restorative practices give space for that time. A lot of times teachers or administrators want the children out of the building. Sometimes you do need the children out of the building to let the swelling go down. And most of the time you can just bring them back and use those restorative practices to grow the relationship that needs to be grown anyway.
Thank you, Ms. O.
Hello. So as a parent, I find restorative practices to be valuable because I think they're a natural complement to trauma-informed practices, which really get to the heart of why our children come to school and behave the way they do with some of those negative outcomes. Also, as a parent, restorative practices gives my child, it expands her decision-making capability, it makes her a better student overall, a better person, and it just really adds to that entire sense of community that we need, you know, to really make this world a better place. So that's why restorative practices are valuable to me.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here in Pittsburgh this evening. Why restorative justice and restorative practices? It's very simple. It promotes healing for everyone in the process. The reason we sit in a circle is because everyone can be seen as being equal. Everyone can take accountability for a mistake that may have occurred in the process. We know as an offender and a victim. Once the offender is able to understand and fully hear the ramifications of the offense that took place, he can then, or she can actually take accountability and a whole circle can come together to have an agreement that will promote healing for everyone in the process. It's important after that agreement has taken place to follow up. The way I recommend follow up is within 30 days and 90 days, so that way we can ensure that restorative justice just didn't get thrown out the window. Accountability, didn't get thrown out the window. Unfortunately, the reality is retributive discipline is still the backbone to American education. Restorative justice now in cities like DC and hopefully Pittsburgh and Oakland is becoming a very disruptive innovator, and the school-to-prison pipeline is real. Restorative justice is not something that's for sale. Unfortunately, our students are for sale.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Thank you all. I ask that you please hold your applause to the end. Thank you. So now we can start. We're going to start with you, Mr. Lawson, okay? We're going to go back this way. So the question is, what do you think should be the priority when creating a strong foundation for the implementation of restorative practices?
So first, it has to be a top-down approach in order to truly have a restorative justice system in a school district that's going to work. We need inclusive language that actually outlines what restorative justice and what restorative practices is. It needs to have a parent handbook so that way parents can understand what restorative justice is. You need to involve all your stakeholders inside the school community to actually understand what restorative justice is, its effectiveness, and why it is that it's taking place inside the school. And once that occurs, it's really important that the school has a rubric, a restorative justice rubric. It's understood that not every incident can be referred to restorative justice. I'll give you an example. If a kid brings a firearm in a building, I have yet to be in a school in America where unfortunately we cannot just suspend the student to put on Band-Aid for the safety and security of the students in that school community. However, a restorative practice can still take place when that young woman or young man comes back to the school, which we actually did have happen twice last year in the District of Columbia Public Schools, to welcome that student back into the school community where they can understand what the ramifications of the harm was of their offense and why the incident actually took place.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
So a couple of things that I think are a priority, one of which would be collecting accurate data about restorative practices, the use, the outcomes, also ensuring that there's appropriate training and then support for the teachers and the key staff who are going to roll out the restorative practices within the school. But most importantly, to Zach's point, I think leadership involvement is absolutely critical. So culture, just like poop, rolls downhill. So when you have leadership who supports, who communicates, and who is consistent in the adoption of restorative practices, you're going to have a much greater likelihood of having teachers who believe in it, teachers who can effectively communicate that to their parents that they interact with, and an overall improved school culture. So I would say leadership is really the priority.
Thank you.
So restorative justice and restorative practices is not something that we do to children or do for children. It's something that we do with children. And as Principal Calvert said earlier, it really is the entire community. It is a paradigm shift. It is, you must begin to think restoratively. And it doesn't work really as easily if there are folks in the community who don't truly understand. And I don't want to say drink the Kool-Aid, but that's probably what some people might feel like you have to do, but it's really a paradigm shift. You really have to begin to think restoratively in order for it to truly take hold. And it has to be everyone. And if there isn't belief from the leaders, it's going to falter as it moves down.
Thank you.
I totally agree with everything all three of you said. I'm going to take it away from like a structural, like protocol approach and just kind of get right here, you know. It takes patience. It takes persistence, right? We're changing mindsets, people. We're long-held mindsets, right? When everyone here went to school, raise your hand, the teacher stood up there and said, do this, and you did it, or you got in trouble, right? That's it. And if you got in trouble, you saw a guy like me who you didn't want to see, right? I had a teacher, a wonderful person, a wonderful teacher, in a discipline committee meeting that we meet once a month. And we were talking about how can we get to work better? How can we're still having kids, they're acting out, you know, whatever. And she said, well, maybe if you don't smile so much at them, right? Maybe if there's not so many high fives, maybe if they feared you a little bit. And I went home last night on my long drive home, and I was that night, and I was thinking, wait a minute. So I'm going to do an experiment, and when students walk by me on their way into school every day, when I'm usually high-fiving them and smiling at them, and I'm going to put my hands behind my back and just nod at them. You should have seen these kids. What do I do? You know what I mean? It was sad. And finally, the same teacher came up to me, just quit, hey, high five. And my point is, I'm not saying the high-fiving kids is restorative practices. Please don't miss my point. My point is, and to piggyback off of you, it's how we look at school. It's how we look at children. It's how we build those relationships. It's saying that we value you for the person you are. We don't hold you to the acts you do, right? Those can be corrected, but intrinsically you have value, and that's something that takes a lot of patience to follow through with and get buy-in.
1 second, just a follow-up question for you. So as a principal, and you're in a discipline meeting, how do you talk to your teacher, or how do you deal with that teacher when you know they have that mindset if you're implementing that in your school?
Right, well, thank you for that question. And I think that's where it comes to where the three of you all spoke to. You stick to the protocols, you stick to the research, you let them know. And then you appeal to their hearts, right? I mean, because they didn't get in it to not love kids, right? They're here to love kids, so sometimes we got to remind them a little bit and let them know that what you did always doesn't necessarily mean it was the right way to go, and I'm going to show you a better way. And the proof is in the kids, right? The proof's in when they come to school and what we're giving them, and that they're in the classrooms. So.
Thank you.
Can I add to that or no?
30 more seconds, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to add that that's really an opportunity to grow the relationship with that adult who doesn't necessarily, and it's an intentional thing. It's an intentional relationship building opportunity so that they can see a different perspective.
Thank you.
You have 10 seconds.
10 seconds. We have to understand the needs and values of not only our students, but we need to understand the adults in the building as well. It's okay to have common ground, to build off disagreements with people that you never thought you would be able to do so. And that's what restorative justice and practices is all about, being able to understand and build common ground with those that we may have disagreements with. And as adults, it can be very hard at times.
Thank you.
And that includes parents.
Yes, parents, I'm sorry.
We're like cutting Miss... okay. Did she answer yet? Okay.
Well, as the attorney for students, I'll chime in and say we need to listen to students, and we need to create an environment where student voice, as well as parent and community engagement, is considered essential. We also need to stop hoping that race-neutral approaches are going to address the very real and significant disparities between Black and brown students and their white peers in both discipline and educational outcomes. We know that for many students, school does not feel like a place where they feel welcomed and safe and affirmed or see themselves reflected, either in the adults or the curriculum. And so restorative practices gives us the space and the tools where we can talk more explicitly about this, about the different types of racism in play in the school building and the connections between bias, both implicit and explicit, and the outcomes we're looking at.
Thank you. What pieces, environment, or other aspects have to exist in order for restorative practices to work effectively? Yes.
Okay. So as I think many of the panelists have said, we're talking about changing the hearts and minds here, and that is no small thing. And we need, while we're doing that, the rights of students and parents to be upheld. We need to recognize that students have civil rights in schools and that there is an equal and high expectation and opportunity for them to succeed. That includes addressing inadequate and inequitable resources among school districts in Pennsylvania and among school buildings. And then I'd like to point out that we really need to start earlier. Our early childhood and preschool colleagues are ahead of the game than our school-age peers. And the Pennsylvania Department of Education just released 2 policies this summer that said early childhood education programs need to include everyone, and now that we're opening up the door to everyone, we have to stop pushing out the Black and brown students out the back door, because we're talking about 4 and 5-year-olds, and Black boys make up nearly 50% of the children, the babies, that are being suspended and expelled from preschool programs. Therefore, teach them. So we can really look to some of our colleagues both across the country and in different fields that are further on the path than we are.
Thank you.
Ditto. So, you know, I guess it's not time to talk to challenges, but I think this question relates to that. So, you know, a big indicator, the big buzz is suspensions, right? In school, out of school, whatever. But what we have to understand, for restorative practices to really take place, right, and things like character education, social emotional learning, those types of things, we have to have the resources and the staffing to do so, right? My goal as a principal was 0 suspensions. You know, this year at Phillips, we did away with our in-school room. We don't have a room where we exclude students that we care about, right? Where you sit, you can sit here all day because we don't want to mess with you, right? We can't do that. But without the resources and the staff, it limits, from a school leader's perspective, it limits my choices. It makes it difficult. There are times where I have suspended kids, where I'm scratching my head. What else can I do? What other recourse do I have? What staff do I have? We want to be restorative. We want to have a restorative conference. We wanted, what staff can take the lead? Who can plan? Who can you know what I mean? Those types of resources and staffing have made it difficult. So we are getting more creative and better, and we're learning from districts that do it right. But I think in order to implement restorative practices properly in Pittsburgh and anywhere else, we need to take a hard look at where we're putting our money and our staff, where we're putting the human resources and the financial resources where our mouth is, so to speak, so that school personnel like myself can make the right decisions on the ground and make it happen for kids.
Thank you.
I have a bajillion thoughts going through my head. I want to offer that I'm not sure that we have to change the way people think, because I think at the core of who we are as human beings, love is something that doesn't, it's not that foreign. I think that we do have to, the intentionality of how we do what we do is important, and it has to be intentional that we support and challenge our students. I learned a long time ago that it's okay for us to give our students a kick in the pants and a bear hug, as long as you're doing both. And that's what I do all the time. And we didn't really talk about statistics, but when I first started in the district, I worked at another school before I came to DCPS, and I very rarely suspended anyone. So I brought a lot of what I did to DCPS. And when I came, the district kind of, they were showing that I was everybody was kind of like, oh, Miss O, Miss O, Miss O. I had all these suspensions. I was winning all these long-term suspensions. Like, I never lose. I don't lose because my documentation is so tight and I have all these interventions. And so everybody was like, oh, Miss O is doing it right. She's suspending them right. And then we started talking about restorative justice, but I was doing all this before it became a buzzword, a buzz phrase. I got you. And last year, the data showed that I reduced 9,000 suspension days. I recouped 9,000 suspension days from our students, from suspending students. I'm still suspending. I still do suspend, but it's different. It's the intentionality of how we do it.
Thank you, Ms. O.
So as a parent, what environments need to exist? I think the first thing is raising awareness. So I think a lot of times disenfranchised parents especially who don't have access to A+ and these kind of wonderful rich opportunities have no idea that these things are taking place and that there are rooms full of people on a Tuesday night talking about the health of their students and their families, right? So I just think that's really, really critical and something that I try really hard to do in my role as a parent leader. One of the other things that I think is important is sharing best practices. Recently, I was invited to go to DC, where I met these wonderful people on either side of me to see exactly what they were doing in their schools, how they were achieving the results that they were, the impact it was having on student culture, and it was a phenomenal experience, right? And I came back really amped, really excited, and really ready to dig my heels in and start instituting some of these practices, in my own schools that I work with. I had a third thing that I wanted to share, and it has just right out of my head. Maybe Zach will share it for me. Okay.
Thank you.
So first off, I want to echo everything that has been said. And I want to say that love is not an evidence-based practice. Restorative justice, once again, is not something that is for sale. However, what you will see is that I call AFI is you're available for instruction. Available for instruction. We are now seeing students that are more available for instruction. And why is it that my school has been on the map? Because we effectively reduced our suspension rate by 54%, and we were not one of the schools that was outlined in the Washington Post for the do not admit list. It took a lot of time. When I first came to that school 5 years ago, there was an ambulance at that school almost every other day. There was a point where there was a fight at that school just about every day. Why? Because we have an overaged, underaccredited population from every neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and my state superintendent of education is in here, the majority of which live in Maryland and outlining other areas. And it's important that we understand that when you use restorative justice and restorative practices, if you take away the elements, you take away the fidelity of the process. If we're not sitting in a circle, I can't really see that everyone's being equal. If there's not a centerpiece in the... Did my time get cut off? If there's not a centerpiece in the center of the circle, I don't have somewhere to really put my thoughts to. If there's not a talking piece, then I don't know who has the power and who's being heard. And if there's not an agreement, then I feel like the circle was just a waste of time. And if there's not a follow-up, then I may feel like accountability just went out the window.
Thank you. Applause to the end. Y'all is not going to follow the applause rule, huh?
sorry, I remembered the third point
Yeah,
I
you got
wanted to
time.
make. Zach, he did jog my memory. Inclusion of parents and families in this process. Not to say that I expect that schools are going to include parents in the restructuring of discipline, and that anytime, there needs to be something done that we have to stop, call, Molly's mom and get her approval. Absolutely not. But as we talked about, this restorative practices is truly a paradigm shift. And we need the folks whose children are being impacted by this, who are ultimately being impacted by this, to understand why we're doing it, what it's about, how they can become part of the process, where they can go to get support and to support the process overall.
Thank you.
Can I speak to that just for 1 second? One of the strengths that I bring to our building is my ability to connect with families. I was getting calls on the way up here driving from parents. They have access to me, and I think that's probably why my children say what they say. But parents really are the partners in our building. I include parents probably more than they want to be included, but it's important because you all send us the best children that you have. And for me, it is imperative that every move I'm making, so that every move my staff is making, so that you're informed about what's happening with your child when you're not there.
Thank you, Ms. O. So before we go on to our targeted questions for the panelists, our ushers will begin to collect the audience questions. If you completed one, please hold it up in the air so they can come around and get it. Okay. So our next questions will be targeted towards our panelists who are school staff, Principal Culver, Ms. O, and Zach. You will each have 2 minutes to answer each question. So same as before. You ready? So the first question is, how does your school enable students to learn the values, attitudes, and behaviors that will help to build a strong school community? We can start with Principal Culver.
I don't think that those time cards were meant for us. I think you thought you had different people who weren't going to go over every single time on the. But so when we talk about restorative practices at Phillips, it was important for me to kind of look at the whole child approach, and so we've really grown and grown and grown as time goes on to kind of incorporate character education with restorative practices, and we kind of see them all in a PBIS system, which is like positive behavior interventions and supports, and kind of folding them in to the same burrito, right? And so what we want to do is to respect the student, when something occurs, we go through the restorative questions with both the student who could be the offender and the victim. We go through those things, but we also want to make sure that 3 things happen when an incident occurs, that we do something that's restorative, something that's reflective, and something that's instructional with all of our students, and that's really important. And it's also important, again, I think someone mentioned it, that the whole idea we do stuff with students, we do stuff with the people in our building instead of to them or for them. Because discipline, when you feel like something's being done to you, then that really relieves you of control of the situation, right? That's immediate detachment. You've just taken the bridge between my actions and decisions and what happens to me, and you've torn it down, right? Because it doesn't matter what I do, because that guy's going to do this to me anyway, right? So we see restorative practices and all these things as making sure we make that connection. If we really want students to learn, right, and grow in their choices and their decision making, then it's really important to us that they know that they are an equal partner in their own future as we are. No one's doing something to them. So 10 seconds. I'm out.
Thank you, Principal Calvert.
I'm just going to say one word: intentionality.
Oh, that's me now. Well, I think first off, your school building actually needs to promote a restorative justice and restorative practices culture. And what we have done is we have now had our whole circle staff meetings where we come together in whole circle. We have a leadership circle, which includes all stakeholders in the building. And most importantly, when we're having staff-on-staff conflicts, we actually mediate those conflicts. The student. Okay, so understanding in the school culture community that we have diverse perspectives, just like we have diverse students, is important. We need to recognize that and appreciate that no one is wrong in the school community. And as a school leader, you cannot always make decisions yourself and then wonder why 80 or 90% of your staff is turning over every year and you're having so much pushback. It's easy to get burnt out. What we do is we make sure that we have a restorative culture that practices, promotes, and permits the use of restorative practices. And with that, you find yourself having the 3 C's in a school community, which is staff and parents that are caring, connected, and concerned about their students.
Can I just build really quick since he didn't use all of his time?
1 second.
There's been a common theme here that has to do with energy and resources, right? So what I've really tried to talk to my
Just so
staff
you know,
about,
1 second, you have the rest of Ms. O's time. So
What's that?
you got about a minute.
Have my time. You have
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, great. And think about how much energy it takes and resources it takes to put a kid like in an in-school suspension room. You got to have somebody sit with them all day, right? You have to go, the teacher is crazy before it gets to that, and they're drained. So really, when we talk about the work, and I think in the first question we talked about the difficulty and the work and how it takes time and effort and perseverance and persistence. But if we really look at what we've been doing, I think we've been spending a lot more time and effort and energy and fatigue doing it the wrong way, right? So if we put our time in and we do it right and we learn it right and have everything in place, then I think the drain on our people and our teachers and our students and our parents and those resources will diminish greatly as well. Thanks for the time.
The next question is, how do adults in the building model these behaviors as well?
You start with Ms. O in the middle. Yes, still school-based.
So you can go first. Okay.
No, we start with you.
Okay. It's not a simple solution. It's not an easy fix. We have almost 1,000 students in our building, and not all of our faculty and staff understands the importance of everyone being on the same page. For me, it is everyone the instructional staff, the support staff. It includes the facilities. It includes our food service folks, every single person in the building. And that is a huge undertaking in a district where, quite frankly, test scores are important. So it is a challenge. We do our best to push each other to make sure that all the adults, all the stakeholders understand and are a part of what we're doing. I think our facility staff, they appreciate it when I give them students to help repair harm that they have inflicted on the community by just, trashing the building. That's beautiful. It's a continual push to have everyone feel connected. And that's how we model it, just by continuing to push.
Thank you, Ms. O.
So we have to show our students that we are no different than they are. We're human. That we can also accept accountability at times when we understand when we may have had some wrongdoing. There may have been times where we have disrupted a student. We have emotionally disturbed a student. And we understand that we're going to come together in a full circle to make things right. And we also understand as adults that we are going to honor an agreement that we made with the young man or the young woman so that we all can come together to promote healing in the process. Otherwise, restorative justice can just very simply be one more district or citywide initiative that is thrown at us, that's put a policy into place that we don't really understand. Well, what are those elements? Because we want actually to promote healing within the process. We have to show our young students at times what it is that we expect from them. An example of this would be a guidelines and expectations circle that we have at the beginning of the semester when the class starts. And that way we can actually hear the voices of our students so they understand that they are also being taken into consideration. As adults, we need to understand that our most valuable asset in the building is the students. Because without the students, I don't think we would have a building or we would have a school district. So we need to work with our young people to collectively identify what our harms is so we can create lasting and effective solutions to promote restorative justice and restorative practices for everyone.
Thank you.
So, it's about relationships, right? Relationships with adults, relationships with the students, and so how can we affect the behavior of adults in the building to buy into restorative practices? It's about building those relationships with them, right? And then valuing the relationship with the students. And I agree with you 100% that, the students, and I have to remind everybody all the time, the students are why we exist. We exist for them. And I'll go even a step further. That's why society does what we do for our young people, right? Because the dream is that the next generation will be better than us, and it just keeps getting better from there. Sometimes we look at what's happening now, and we're like, it's crazy what's going on. It's like we're taking steps backwards, but we can't afford to do that. And so it's about building those relationships with staff. And I'll tell you, this is our third year as a restorative practices school. And I also agree with one word you said, humanity, right? We're not numbers. Our kids aren't numbers, right? I mean, we put a test score, we put a grade next to them, we can talk about discipline, data. And I use data every day. It helps us to make good decisions for our kids, but we have to humanize it, right? We can't just say the rule is the rule, this happens, you're out. We have to humanize it. We have to look at the function of the behavior. We have to look at what situations kids are in. And we can't keep looking at parents and saying, well, what do they come here with? Because it doesn't matter. They're in our building, right? So we have to meet the kids where they come. We have to meet them where they enter into our space, right? And we can't say this is our space, my space, this is our space. And the kids have every right to have that voice, and the adults need to understand that. And I think it starts with building those relationships with the adults. It starts with adults and it feeds down into kids.
Thank you, Principal Halbert. We got one more question for you guys, and we're going to start with Mr. Larson. So this question, I want you to please talk about the successes, challenges, and failures of implementing restorative practices in your schools. For example, do you have stats on the reduction of suspensions, increased test scores, or better school climates?
So as I said earlier, we have decreased our suspension rate last year alone by 54%. And the year before that, it was over 70%. As far as test scores, we've seen our Park Achievement scores actually go on a rise. Our SRI scores, we've modeled reading and what literacy looks like to our students and why it's so important. So our Scholastic Reading Intervention scores has gone all the way up. And we're seeing that our students actually feel cared about, connected, and concerned. Like, we're concerned about their well-being, and they are wanting to come to school. One thing we've done in our school community is we've created a personal responsibility coaching program, and in that program, everyone in the building is responsible for a caseload of 5 to 8 students. And what we do is we check in with those students. We have circles with those students. We understand what the needs are of those students and how we can support them for them to want to come to school every day, because we've actually built those effective relationships. So data is great. I can use it to give me grant money because I don't have a PTA. However, it's great because I'm actually changing and saving lives. The majority of my student population came to Luke Seymour Opportunity Academy because they were put out of the traditional school system. We have to change the design model. Again, it's a disruptive innovator. Not everyone likes what we're doing at Luke Seymour. Not everyone understands it because not everyone wants to sit down and really understand that it is a paradigm shift and we're in the business of saving lives.
Thank you.
And you can if you want.
We'll let you have the last word this time. There's been many challenges along the way. I think, part of the challenge is everybody looks for results. The teacher's looking for results. So why are my kids acting any differently, right? And the district's looking for results. Why are your suspensions still up, right? Why aren't your test scores going through the roof? Come on, Calvert, you know what's going on. Get it done. But I think the challenge is the proof isn't in the numbers. The proof is in the people. I just said that by kind of being a dead horse, right? So if a student punches another student in the face, he may get suspended. But what are we doing to restore him? What are we doing to repair a relationship between those students? Are we respecting the victim and the offender, right? Are we handling those? Life happens, right? Life's going to continue to happen. Of course, we want to prevent. We want test scores to go up. We want all these things. One of the challenges is people say it isn't working. When it is working, right, those other things take time. That's been a big challenge at the time. And the other big challenge, I spoke to it earlier, is support, right? There's been so many times where I know what the right thing, you ever know what the right thing to do is, but you just feel like your hands are tied, right? You can't do it. I don't have the people, the time, the this and that, and those are all excuses, but they're real when you're an elementary school principal with 300 kids and no assistant principal and no learning specialist and no behavior specialist. And I'm social worker, I'm principal, I'm, supervisor, I'm doing it all. But now I got this one kid who needs me right now, and we got to do this right, and that's been a challenge. So we're overcoming a lot of those challenges. But again, if you're going to push your districts and your community, push them for the resources so the schools have what they need to make these things work appropriately for kids.
Thank you.
I think one of the biggest challenges for our school is the complete buy-in. Not all of the faculty and staff believes that this is happening. So our city is 4 quadrants, and most of the comprehensive high schools, those students that live in that quadrant, they go to the school that's in that quadrant. Our school is the only school in the District of Columbia that has 3 of the 4 quadrants boundary to our building. That poses a huge challenge. We're the second largest high school in the district, and it poses a huge challenge because of all the neighborhood issues. I can say the greatest success that I've seen is the neighborhood beefs have really toned down, and I tell the students in the beginning of the year, the only hood that you're representing in once you hit 1700, once you cross the threshold, is Rambler Hood. We're Ramblers. So I think that the children are really driving. That's a success for me. They will pull me, Miss O, we need a circle. I need to get these girls. And so that has been a huge success for me. So the culture of our building is changing. I'd like to see it change a little quicker, but I can see clearly that has been really positive change in our buildings. The culture is way better. And I talked about the statistics. 9,000 days we recouped last year from students being out of the building that available for instruction.
Thank you, Ms. O. Our next 2 questions are for Shalegra. You have 2 minutes per question. How are you as a parent advocating for restorative practices?
So the primary way in which I'm advocating for restorative practices is by working with the administration at one of the schools I'm involved with. I've got the honor and privilege of being a PTO president for a local homegrown charter school. That's really an advantage because they walk, they talk, and they breathe parent and family inclusion, and they understand the value of having parents at the table with them. And so I have the ear of administration and leadership. But one of the things that I am also learning, particularly in my role as a PTO president, is that I have got to do my due diligence in helping hold those same staff accountable. So it's very easy to talk about, rolling out restorative practices. We practice youth court and peer mediation, but it's very easy for things to get dropped, throughout the course of the year as other problems or other issues and initiatives and test scores come on the horizon. So the biggest thing that I'll be doing going forward is having standing check-ins, with the leadership team. How are things going? Where are we going? How can I better support you? How can I help get the message out to the larger community? So.
Thank you. The next question is, how did you build support from other parents and advocates around implementing restorative practices into your school community?
So that is a challenge. Parent engagement, family engagement is always a challenge, even with my boisterous personality. The PTO president wakes up just like this, woohoo, right? I'm out there, in the mornings, I'm greeting families, PTO meeting nights, I'm there until the moment the meeting starts. I'm really trying to encourage parents to join us and just be part of the conversation. But what I know that I can do and what we're going to be doing differently this year is using that same platform, right? So when we have PTO meetings, thankfully we do have parents that show up. So part of our PTO meetings, there'll be some dedicated time to talk about what's going on with restorative practices at, our school during that month. We have a very extensive email communication list that I'm really proud of. We've got almost 100 parents that are part of our email list, and even though we don't get 100 parents that show up at meetings, when I say, hey, do you get the emails? They're like, yeah, I got the emails, I got that, right? So it encourages me that parents are reading the information that's being sent out. And obviously, I'm wise enough and prudent enough to know that parents are busy. We've got a lot of things that we're juggling, we can't always be there, so to speak, but not being present in a space doesn't mean that they're not present, and I respect that so tremendously. So again, I'll be using email communication more frequently to get focused messages out.
Thank you. And our final two questions are for Cheryl before we open it up to a few audience questions. Can you provide us with a brief overview of the legal and economic strains we would face as a society if we continue utilizing zero-tolerance policies within schools?
Well, this is a big question. And I really want to start by recognizing the tremendous privilege that I have and speak from. I'm not an educator. I'm not a parent. I'm a white lady sitting in my office in downtown Pittsburgh telling you what the law is. And that is a very privileged position on multiple fronts. And I start by saying that because what I've been asked to outline, what would a future look like if we stayed on this course, is not a pretty picture. And unfortunately, we really don't have to imagine it. This is the course we have been on. This is how the system of public education was designed, and it's working as it's designed. And so we need to work together to change it. So when we think about current policies paired with the system of inequitable education funding in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is the most unequally funded state of the country. It's number one. Funds schools the most inequitably in the entire country. And so when we think about that, paired with factors like discriminatory practices in housing, our current criminal justice system, unemployment, these systems operate in tandem to ensure that Black and brown students do not have the same access to a high-quality education as their white peers. And this leads to increased segregation in schools. And when we are talking about students in racially segregated schools, we're talking about increased presence of school police, of juvenile probation officers, and our schools that are more likely to rely on these sort of exclusionary, strict discipline policies we're talking about. And so when we're talking about the future, I want to lift up that this month, the Pennsylvania Department of Education released its state plan of how it intends to implement the current iteration of No Child Left Behind. And in its future goals for 2030, our state still says that only a fraction of students of color, English language learners, or students with disabilities should graduate or succeed on their standardized tests. That is the goal the state is setting, and it is just simply unacceptable and perpetuates the stereotypes of lower expectations that we have for our brown and black children. So this is what the future looks like if we don't work together to change it.
Okay, thank you. So our second question is, what policies need to exist so that restorative practice is utilized as a viable alternative to exclusionary discipline?
So in thinking about what policies we need to have in place, it's helpful to have a framework of what policies we currently have, because we want policies that, as I listen to the practitioners and educators here, we need to understand what's really going on in the child's life when something is showing up at school and have that trusted relationship that allows us to know about it and address it. But too often we're using a sledgehammer in discipline policies to address a situation that really requires a scalpel. And so I want to lift up one example, which is earlier this year we were in court with Pittsburgh Public Schools based on how they were using a zero tolerance discipline policy. And in Pennsylvania, folks should know, there's actually only one true zero tolerance discipline policy in the state, and that's if a child brings a weapon to school. And as Zach talks about, we all understand the importance of keeping weapons out of school. But the problem arises when school districts use this weapons policy to respond not to student behavior, but apply the actual behavior of what's going on, or allow for a positive and appropriate re-welcoming and reintegration into the school setting. So fortunately, the courts agreed with us when we said, hey, this law only applies to actual weapons. Yes, respond harshly and quickly when a child brings a weapon to school, but when it's not a weapon, use one of the many tools we have and learn from restorative practices to address the actual situation. And then I would just lift up one other quick example. Pennsylvania recently changed its truancy law so that no longer can a student be suspended from school for not going to school. And I know these seem like common sense changes, but this is where we're at. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening, thinking about how we can work together to move from here.
Thank you. We can open up to audience questions now. So our first question is for, Due to limited time, we have to lump audience questions into categories so we can hear answers about different aspects. With that, let's jump in. Okay. So this question is for Principal Calvert. You're popular today. So, how could PPS give teachers the slack and the time pressures they are under to deliver tested content to make room for engaging and restorative practices?
Yeah, that's a good
A
question.
teacher wrote that.
Yeah. That's a good question. Actually, I'm very pleased with Dr. Hamlet and some of his initiatives. One of the things that he's done here in Pittsburgh Public that hasn't been done since I've been here is he created his strategic plan, and like when we're being trained as administrators, the initiatives that we're planning are aligned, and it's very transparent on how they're aligned. So we know where we're going, what's the expected outcome, and what comes next. And I think with something like restorative practices and teachers, I think that's really important, right? Too often, and you mentioned this, Zach, I believe, you roll things out, and it's, oh, this is one more thing we got to do. A couple years will go away, and 20 years, what's old is new again, right? And that's where we roll. but having a framework to put it into, right, and doing what we expect teachers to do is begin with the end in mind, right? If I expect my teachers to begin with the assessment and then plan backwards from the assessment. So you begin with what you expect the kids to be able to do, and then you plan to get there, right? So what I've done on my level, and I believe Dr. Hamlet and his staff are beginning to do at Pittsburgh Public, is begin with that end in mind and then go backwards so the teachers know, they know the question we're answering because we've already asked it, right? We're not asking them for answers that we haven't even, we're not giving them answers to questions they haven't asked yet, if that makes any sense. So I think that's really important here in PPS, and I think we're well on our way, and we still have work to do, but we know where we want to be, and we know that restorative practices is an integral part of getting our students where they need to be, which is high student achievement. And I see Salim and Promise Ready as well.
Thank you.
And next question is for, well, whoever wants to answer it. What do you recommend as essential to sustain the work? Sustain the work.
I'm going to use the same word, intentionality. If it's not intentional, and fidelity.
And commitment.
Yep, intentional commitment and fidelity.
Perseverance. We challenge our students every day just by coming to school, and we do not understand what is really inside of what I call their invisible backpack. Every one of my students, I challenge to step outside of their comfort zone, and I challenge my staff to step outside of their comfort zone. This last year, I took 58 students to go camping on an island that was 40 degrees raining, and we were freezing, and everyone survived and had a great time. And I use that example to say, restorative justice, when you look at it, it can look like you're doing voodoo magic. Really, it can. But you need to step outside of the box to understand why it's a disruptive innovator, why so many different school districts are using it, and let's all come together to a full circle to try something different, because what's working now isn't working. Okay, the parent advocate said it for me. It isn't working.
Thank you.
One of the things that and I already forgot about the initial question, but just to kind of piggyback, going back to challenges too, is it's got to be age appropriate. One of the things we struggle with a little bit at Phillips on the elementary level is, you're working with a kindergartner or a first grader, and some of these students come with, again, they all come at the door. We have to meet them where they come, and whether it be developmentally or, we have to figure out how can we make restorative practice work for these kids. So I'm asking them the restorative questions, and they're looking at me like, I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Coward. And sometimes my staff looks at me the same way. But I think to be sustainable, you also have to level it for the age and have experts on hand who can make it work with various age levels and, again, meeting students where they come.
Hey, thank you. This question is for Ms. O. The question is, are restorative practices modified to accommodate ELLS and children with disabilities? If so, how? And how do you make sure it's culturally relevant?
Great question. So yes, ELS. If I need someone to help me with a language that I don't speak, I'll definitely bring them in. Same thing for parents. When parents, I just make sure that there's someone that can help us to authentically communicate with whatever student. Culturally relevant, our school is, I would say, 98% African American. Our teaching staff isn't. I definitely challenge our teaching staff to look at things from a different perspective, which in and of itself is a learning opportunity for those folks who don't have the same experience. Cultural relevance, ELS, what did you, oh, and frankly, the way that I approach any situation with any child and family is that they are. Our faculty meet students where they are, and that invisible backpack is real. I definitely acknowledge that because the trauma-informed approach and practice is it's real and it's important. It's intentional.
I just wanted to add something on the question before last. As a parent, I think it's administrators, teachers, school leaders really need a mechanism to remove teachers from buildings and classrooms that aren't interested in getting it. I mean, we all know some of those teachers. We've all had some of those teachers. I think that the teachers union is a double-edged sword, but ultimately, when we start talking about these issues where, you know, we can't get people on board, if you don't want to be on board, then you need to get off the train, and you all need mechanisms to get them off the train.
This next question is for Zach. It's a question from Facebook.
We're live streaming this.
Oh, I'm on Facebook Live. Mark Zuckerberg was at my school.
I believe restorative justice dialogue is extremely important in the implementation and success of this program. Therefore, what emphasis would you put on the dialogue aspect of this program and how to ensure dialogue facilitators are properly trained?
So that's a great question. The first thing when it comes to training is you have to make yourself available for training, just like we want our students available for instruction. We need to make sure that we're taking set away time from our very busy schedule to do the 3-day or 5-day training. It's there for a reason. We need to understand that when we are doing this training, we need to come with an open mind. We need to be ready to learn, to grow, to live off of one another. Restorative justice and restorative practices, it's going to take a long time. The paradigm shift that we are talking about is a general 3 to 5 year paradigm shift. And the reason for that is because it's so tremendously difficult to not just get everyone in your building on board, to get your school district on board, to get your elected officials on board, to get your school police officer on board, to get your cafeteria worker on board. I could sit here all day long and talk about the trainings and how I implement it in different schools and how I lead the trainings. But the biggest reason that the trainings don't work is because adults will leave the training and then say, oh, restorative justice, I had the training, it doesn't work.
Get them off the train.
You're going to get on the bus or you're going to get hit by the bus.
Thank you. So our next question is for Ms. Kleiman. So the question goes, what evidence do you provide for critics of restorative practice who argue that this approach costs too much, and examples are labor, training, etc.? I think he kind of touched on it, but.
Do our children cost too much? It is, you know, a frequent response when I show up in any space, and again, from the vantage point that I have to say, you're doing it wrong, this is a bad outcome, and then I get to go back downtown. But when anyone says to me, but there are just some kids that got to go, I really challenge us to be explicit, because it's saying that Black children have to go, that students with disabilities have to go, that English language learners or all of the children that the public system of education has historically least served has to go. And that's just an unacceptable outcome. We are all entitled to an education, and I'm inspired by the people I'm sitting up here on this stage with to know that there are partners in the schools, in the communities, in homes, saying that the way we're currently operating is unacceptable. And I don't think that costs too much. What do our lives cost? What do our children's lives cost?
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our questions for the panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. I think y'all should clap a little louder because y'all clapped a lot when I told you not to clap. So now we'll turn it back over to Brandy.
So, okay, I want to hijack the agenda. Do I have time? Okay, all right, really quick. I want to address a couple of things, and the one thing that I want to address first, since I got all the technical verbiage out there already, and I can just have a conversation. The question about how could PPS give teachers the slack and the time pressure that they're under to deliver tested content to make room for engaging in restorative practices. So if you're familiar with the 80-20 principle, that's one, keep that in mind. The other thing is time is time. If you remember that continuum that was up on the screen, there was a proactive piece and a reactive piece. So you can either spend that time being proactive and talking to that child and making them understand what it means to be engaged in a real relationship with a person and caring and understanding and giving them that piece that they need, or you can spend that time on the back end in truancy court, in diversion programs, and going to jail and sending letters and all those other things with the school to prison pipeline. That's your 80-20. Either you're going to be 80% proactive in this, or you're going to be 20%. Time is time. It just depends on where you're going to spend it. That's the first thing. My other thing is I'm a restorative parent. And I came into this about 3 years ago, and it was dropped on my lap. And they said, okay, let's do this. Let's talk about this. How can we make this happen? And to be honest with you, I said the same thing. Oh, shoot, it's something else that I have to do. But the more that I read and the more that I learned, I understood that it was necessary. So on your visuals, you have a tale of two stories, tale of two schools. I have a tale of two children. I am a mother of a 19-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. I raise them completely different. So I know that as a parent, it is a complete culture shift for us to disregard everything that our grandmothers and big mamas told us, that we needed to be punitive, that it's spare the rod and spoil the child. But I am a living witness, and I am a parent that lives by this. It was very hard, it's very time-consuming, it's very challenging, and it's definitely a disruptive innovator. And so I had my grandmother looking at me like, why aren't you popping him? But my 5-year-old right now can debate with fourth and fifth graders because I hold conversations with him and I explain to him why it's necessary to behave in a certain manner. I don't need to put a Band-Aid on it. I need to address the situation. I need him to know what behaviors are correct. And so when you are just excluding a child and you're just doing a punitive matter, you don't actually resolve the issue. You never get to the root of it. You can't keep putting Band-Aids on it by just pushing the children to the side. So really, really quick, am I good? 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, my daughter was a senior in high school. And I was already in this restorative practice thing. And I got a call that from her, she's screaming on the other end, she got jumped. She was a senior. I make it to the school, I promise you, in 1 minute flat on 2 wheels. And I get up to the school and I go in and they by the time I make it up to the school, the fight's on Facebook. So I'm able to see the fight. I viewed the fight, the vice principal and the security said, okay, you can go home, we'll give you a call, we'll let you know what the outcome is because we have to review the camera footage. So by the time I make it home, she calls back, she said, don't worry about it, your daughter's not suspended, we seen that she was jumped and we are now going to expel the girls and charges will be filed. And so I'm still mad, that ain't enough for me. And I'm already in restorative practices now. But I want them to pay, their parents to pay, and everybody in their lineage to pay at this point because I'm upset. I done seen the whole foot in my daughter's face. So I'm mad, I'm livid. So I had to go home and think about it for maybe 2-3 days. And then the principal called back and said, is she coming back? I said, she'll come back when she's ready. She's not ready. Then I got a call from Victim for Centers. Thank you. They called me, and I'm already familiar, and they offered the victim offender dialogue. And I cut her off because I already know what this is about. I know this verbatim. So what are you offering me? And who are these girls? How fast can you get these mothers to the table? Because I'm mad and I want them to hear what I have to say about this fight. So I decided, I spoke to my daughter, and we're getting ready to do this victim offender dialogue. But initially, I was completely upset. I was challenged. I cannot explain how upset I was about this by watching this fight. But if I'm really about this, if I'm really about what I say I'm about, and I keep preaching to people that they need to have circles and they need to take a different approach to behavior, and now I'm faced with this challenge, at this very moment of either giving these parents the same opportunity to voice, hey, I'm in the boat with you. My daughters are misbehaving just like you. Giving them the opportunity to say, can you help? Not me necessarily, but is there a space for this? I was challenged with that. Or I could have sent them up the road because they were charging these girls with assault. So I had a choice. I'm a person in a position of authority. I'm a parent. I had a choice to say, I'm willing to sit down with these mothers and talk about this incident and how we can move forward, rebuild that relationship and repair that harm, or I can go ahead and be punitive and send them girls straight up the road, but not on my watch. Because I am held accountable for that. I am contributing to the school to prison pipeline when I say that that's okay to send those girls up the road. And I wasn't okay with that. So that's my part as a parent. Understand it's going to be challenging, but it takes the time. It's time. Where are you going to put that time into it? So that's my rant really quick. And now we're going to move into the next 5 minutes of turn to your partner, to your neighbor, and answer the following questions. What challenges to implementation do you currently see or foresee, and how will you push to overcome those? So you can discuss them with the neighbor next to you, and we'll let you know in a couple minutes when it's time to switch. I got some ice on the side. All right, I didn't mean to get all into a rant, but I drank my water. Whose time? Wait a minute. I don't know.
Amy, am I still on camera? Because I want to get up. Oh.
Are you timing? Who's timing this? 1 minute. 1 more minute? Okay. So I may be cutting you all a little bit short, but in 1 minute it'll be time to switch. Thank you. don't care. Okay, so we're going to move along. It hasn't been quite 5 minutes. It's more like 4 minutes. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone. Hello? Can I have your attention? I'm sorry to break up your conversation. It's not very restorative, I don't believe. Hello? Hello? I'm sorry. I thought you could. I'm sorry. I apologize. Do you need another minute? Because I can give you no. So I want to thank everyone so much for taking the time to share your thoughts. Please feel free to capture your feedback on the note cards and to put them on our sticky wall over here to the right. You can include, if you want to be part of the process, and you can include your name or email or whatever way you want to be contacted. So our final thought for this evening, our final request is to highlight the 3 action items that you can engage after you leave to help us continue to push this work forward. And so the first is to register to testify at a monthly school board public hearing, to contact the district and your local school board representative to receive updates, or you can contact me, Brandy Taylor, to be part of presentations or trainings, or if you just want to engage with the community conversation. I want to make sure it said the right thing there. So, and even if you want to schedule an informational workshop, that's fine as well. So just to let you know, I'll be holding a restorative practice training for days 1 and 2 the following 2 days. So if you're interested, we still have about 4 more slots available if anyone has the time, because they're 8-hour trainings, 2 days. And so with that, I want to thank you all and thank the panelists for taking their time to come today. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say just 2 things. First of all, since you're all here in Pittsburgh, and my school is right across the river, across the Birmingham Bridge, and make a right, Pittsburgh Phillips. If you're interested in coming into the school and seeing what happens in our school, and asking questions and you're curious, please stop in. Our website's pittsburghphillips.com. Give my information. Give me a call. Come down and see. And if you have some feedback, hey, I've seen it done this somewhere else, or have you thought about this? You know, we're here for the kids, and if you're interested in that. Also, we're a magnet school. If you want your kids to go to a great school, we'll take them at Pittsburgh Phillips. And I want to also thank our 2 wonderful young men here who did a great job. Thank you, guys.
I wanted to, this is tough work, what we're doing. I did want to say that we're dealing with an extremely loud minority of students who we spend a lot of time, we spend an inordinate amount of time on that very small, very, very loud, very active population. I want to, our students are doing well otherwise. The social emotional learning that happens with the vast majority of our students, I am hopeful for them. I just didn't want to leave them without some kudos. I wanted to make sure that happened, because these 2 young men right here, ooh, yeah, I'm ultra impressed.
So I'd like for James Fogarty, our Executive Director, to come up and say our closing.
Can I get a hand for all these amazing educators, students, advocates, and to my staff member who I am so lucky to work with, Brandy Taylor. Give it up, please. So we're not done. We need your help to make sure that restorative practices are happening in each and every school. So you can see some action items up here. We need you to do these things, and we can help you. So first, you can contact Brandy, and she can come give presentations at your school, to your community group. Brandy's certified, is a certified IIRP trainer in International Institute for Restorative Practices. She can do trainings with groups if you need support, because we want parents and community members in our community to understand what this is in a real deep way. You can contact the district and your school board representatives. We have another presumptive nominee for school board, Salahuddin here. You can get in his ear just as much as you can get in the ears of these other 2 school board members that are present, and let them know that restorative practices is going to be tough, but we support it over the long haul because we believe it's the right way to discipline and help our students. Really that distinction between discipline and punishment tonight really sticks out for me as exactly what we're trying to think about. And finally, we believe that this community can have the best urban school system in the country, all right? All students, black, brown, white, all of our students can achieve at high levels, and we know that it's going to take hard work to make good schools for all of them. So we appreciate all of you here tonight, all of you at home who are watching this or on your phone if you're on the T or if you're out and about. We appreciate you. Please get involved with our work. Go to aplusschools.org, learn more from us, and we're happy to share more. And thank you all for being part of tonight. If you have comments you want to leave up on our wall here about the evening, feel free just to write them down on the Post-its the cards we gave you. They'll stick. Just leave them there. Otherwise, feel free to sign up to get more involved at the front door as you walk out. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.